hirli agus ma bhuichas da ma cholaki yak de pringle seo an 3 uair atá 3 uair wai chun an bille seo a chur trí John Dáil hep an 2 uair dhearnach ach ní rá an lucht bhí an lucht na rialtas éagsúla nar glacu leis an mille agus in anón na núlgas atá aganne faoin convention idirnáisiúnta. Níl gceist an seo ach cearta bunúsacha agus níl muid i géirí ach lasú a chur sa bhunracht a leige síos gur de réir chéile bhain céimnach de réir chéile go manhíimiid na cearta seo má sin an méid atá i gceist. Ní rud radicach ach rud har a bheith réasúnta agus bunúsach. Tá hirli, I welcome the opportunity to speak on this topic, and I want to thank my colleague Deputy Pringle for his persistence and his hard work. This is his 3rd time to put this bill before the Dáil, and on the last 2 occasions he didn't succeed, but the blame certainly wasn't on him. It was on the 2 governments that failed to support that bill, notwithstanding our very serious obligations under an international covenant on economic, social and cultural rights. That covenant was signed and arose out of the debacle, not the debacle is the wrong word, the horror and the pain of the Second World War. And so it was introduced on the 16th of December 66 and it came into law in 76. We signed it on the 1st of October, as my colleague has said. We signed the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We took our time then until we ratified it, and we waited till 1989, I think 16 years later. And then in 2012, we signed the optional protocol, but we didn't ratify the optional protocol, which of course is very important because without ratifying it, there is no recourse for the citizen who is affected by the failures of various governments. Now, what's interesting, later today we will be asked to sanction the appointment of 2 new members to the GSOC, one of them being Emily Logan, a much respected woman. And I'm just singling her out, and I'll tell you why. Because she was one of the commissioners of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission that made a very strong submission on the last occasion when we were examined by the UN committee in relation to how we were implementing this covenant or this commission. And I think the submission, I didn't read it all, I read as much as I could. There's over 100 pages, 115, and they refer to the convention, the Constitutional Convention that recommended that we amend the Constitution and our look at implementing it in our national legislation. That, of course, has been ignored. She drew attention to many things, she not on her own, with her colleagues and their hard-working small team at the time. And she said that she drew attention to the harsh impact of the austerity cuts on services and supports for the most marginalised. And she referred to the absence of the incorporation into our legislation or into our constitution that would give a basic threshold below which any government couldn't go when they are implementing austerity cuts, some of which are still in being. So I've looked at the amendment, and I know my colleague will be coming back to this, but the amendment is an insult. You're accepting that this bill will be read a second time in 18 months' time without any explanation as to why that's necessary. Now, we're not asking you to rush through legislation in the manner that you have rushed through so many pieces of legislation in the past year. And indeed, against our better instincts on occasions, we helped you with that and stood in solidarity with you for the greater common good. This is for the greater common good now, Minister. And why you would go back 18 months is beyond my comprehension. And I struggle to understand, why would you do that? And it says to tease out the complex issues. Now, there's nothing complex about basic human rights in relation to social, economic and cultural rights. There's nothing complex about that. Certainly, maybe the implications of that might have consequences for any government that they wouldn't like. I can understand that part, but the rights themselves are not complex. We talk about rights all of the time, and you're going to put it back 18 months. so that we'll talk about it in 18 months. And in the meantime, the department is going to look at it. Now, I'd have no faith in that whatsoever. And I'm not sure how the Green Party, and again, I really don't want to bring in parties into this, but I have to bring in the Green Party because they supported my colleague's bill on the last occasion. So how has it changed now? And we need another 18 months of a window to look at. That's just not acceptable. We look at this, we see that so many countries have not only signed it and ratified it, but they also have ratified the protocol. We're talking about 171 parties, 71 signatories. I've mentioned the Constitutional Convention back in 13 and 14, where the members voted in favour of amending the Constitution to strengthen the protection of economic, social and cultural rights. And they also recommended that there should be a constitutional provision that the state would progressively, now listen to that word, progressively, not overnight, progressively, and that's the wording of the bill that Deputy Pringle has before the Dáil today, that they would progressively realise the economic, social and cultural rights, and this duty would be cognizable by the courts. It went on to identify a number of specific rights in relation to housing, social security, rights for people with disabilities, and cultural rights, which it said should be enumerated in the Constitution. Now, the difficulty, of course, of not having it in the Constitution is that the courts, who rightly so have a great respect for the division of powers, don't want to be seen to make law. And on many occasions, they've pointed the finger back at the government. It's the duty of the legislators to bring in legislation so that the courts can enforce it. And unfortunately, utterly failed in that regard. Now, we're talking about economic, social and cultural rights. And in a context of where, and I actually had to check the figure myself because the figure is just so startling. 53 people died in the first 11 months, 56 in the first 11 months of last year in one homeless situation or another. At one stage, we had 10,500 homeless. We're slightly less than that. And we're still not looking at our policies that this is a direct consequence of our policies in relation to housing and health. Indeed, in relation to the pandemic, it came because the consequences of it are much worse because our public health system wasn't fit for purpose, and we know that beforehand. So all we're asking you here today is to make our Constitution mean something in terms of social, economic and cultural rights. We're all acknowledging that it only can be done on a progressive basis, and take it from there. Now, putting it back 18 months is just... Minister, I would hope you'd have a little sense. Agus go mai cíl ceanna agat, tuigeann tú an focail na focail cíl ceanna, go bhfuil rud fólama agat agus ag an rialtas ón pandemic agus ón na círia tromcúisiga a choirí bhain 2013 agus tá siad fós ag leanach de rá, agus na círia sin ag déanamh idirhealú idir na daoine buirte agus na daoine is severa. Indeed, we saw the figures lately for the billionaires that have increased their percentage of wealth to, words fail me really in relation to the amount of wealth they have. And if all of that falls on deaf ears, if all of that does, Minister, perhaps we look at Professor Rowan O'Sullivan, TCD, and I think he's the same person who co-authored the book with Mary Rafferty, Suffer Little Children Gone Back, and really they haven't got the thank that they haven't been thanked in the manner that they should have been. But he highlights, if you don't, and presumably you being any government, if you don't buy the humanitarian argument, there equally is an argument to say that it is actually just more cost effective. And I'll finish, according to Professor O'Sullivan, while it's difficult to obtain an exact figure, and I'm not sure why it is, because we're able to put a price on everything and we're not able to put a value on anything, it costs between 35,000 and 40,000 a year to keep someone in emergency accommodation in Dublin alone. I could go on, my time is up. The same figures apply to our failure to deal with mental illness, our failure to deal with housing, our failure to deal with health. Tá costas a wadnis tromcúisiacha I gceist nuair a hepim muid díriú is deá cearta déana. Gar maith.